Hello and welcome to the first in our series of interviews as part of the Midlands Science Festival 2020. The Midlands Science Festival is run by Midlands Science, who are based here in Tullamore, County Offaly, and is run in conjunction with Science Foundation Ireland as part of the National Science Week programme. My name is Craig Slattery. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Biomolecular and Biomedical Science in University College Dublin, and I'm delighted to be here to talk with Dr Andrew Magee, a psychologist and psychotherapist. Welcome, Andrew, and thank you very much for being with us here today. To get the ball rolling, maybe you could tell us about day-to-day life as a psychologist in Ireland in the time of COVID.
Sure. So, like you said, I'm a psychologist and psychotherapist. My specific role in my work is actually I look after the psychological well-being and the mental health of public service employees. I work a lot with health service employees, but also members of the civil service. So it's a complicated process at the minute. A lot of our staff are working remotely because of COVID, and that brings its own challenges because you're dealing with people now who are adjusting to working at home, maybe working at home with children or working at home in isolation. It's harder for managers to be able to liaise with their teams fully and maintain their team dynamics. And it's challenging also because people are scared right now. People are really worried about what's going to happen next, and are they safe? Are their friends and their loved ones and their family members safe, and are their jobs secure? It's not so much a concern in the public service, but it's still something that people think about.
Yeah, I think there's so many different moving parts, and even you've picked up on so many themes that are going to resonate with people watching. There are people who are maybe themselves not overly concerned with their own vulnerability, but they're worried about maybe going out and bringing it home to somebody who's vulnerable at home, or people going to study and mixing with large groups, and there's a lot of anxiety out there. So I'm sure and we will talk about it as we go through, there are a lot of consequences to lockdown for psychological well-being and mental health.
There's a huge amount. One of the things that's really affecting people most is the lack of contact, actual lack of physical contact often with friends and family and loved ones. There are people who live on their own who maybe haven't had a hug in 10 months, 9 months. And that's difficult. We're naturally affectionate, naturally social animals. There's also an emerging fear because this is evolving over time. We at the start of this, we didn't know what we were dealing with and we didn't know where it was going. And now that we're hearing more and more about kind of the long-term consequences of COVID, you find that people who originally would not have been overly concerned with getting COVID themselves because they would have felt they were young and healthy, or that they didn't have any underlying medical conditions, are now increasingly realizing that irrespective of those factors, it's still potentially a really dangerous virus to contract. So people, I think, are actually becoming a little bit more concerned. And I think as lockdown measures change relative to the threat level at the time, people are really beginning to, I think, struggle to not to keep up, but to keep going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting what you say, that there was such a massive change in daily life and so abruptly. And as a society, I think we've almost spent the last 15, 20 years, really since the advent and the introduction of the mobile phone and that level of connection that everybody had, and everybody, we became more and more interactive and almost subconsciously came to rely on those interactions. And like you say, suddenly for somebody to be isolated to the degree that they have been, it's a massive change.
It's a huge change. And, there are people who left their offices on a Friday and were told over the weekend that they were working from home from now on and haven't returned to their offices. And that's not just a change, it's a rupture in your daily life. It's a complete 90-degree turn. And while at first there was a novelty and it was a bit different, and I think a very typically Irish response to these things is humour, and it was really great to see that, and we do that very, very well. That wears off after a while, and it starts to become heavier, and the impact of these things, all of the factors of these things, because it's slightly different for everybody, but the impact of all of these factors, the kind of the complexity of it really begins to take a toll, and fatigue begins to set in. And it's like setting someone off running a race but not telling them how long the race is going to be, and they have to keep running until they're at the end of the race. So they might start off a little bit faster maybe than they should have, and their endurance wears down over time because they don't know where the finish line is. And that's hard on people.
Yeah, and I think that's, you really identified something that I'm seeing myself, that, you know, there was that phase where it was almost an emergency reactive mode and everybody was doing the best they could, and there was a lot of forgiveness going around and tolerance of things being as good as they could be, and everyone was doing their best. But you do get the sense that that's kind of, it is petering out a little bit, and there's a little bit less forgiveness going around, and people are feeling the pressure, and that lack of certainty around the finish line is a big part of it. That, you know, just how long can you go making it up and improvising and trying to make things as normal as they can be.
It's very hard when the I suppose the novelty, and I don't mean novelty in a positive way necessarily, I just mean the newness of the situation wears off, and the collective, as you said, we're in this together, that kind of collective coping begins to strain or to wear. And what happens is that fear begins to creep in, and fear leads to anger, and anger goes outwards, and then that creates more fear and more anger, and tension builds. That's going to be particularly stressful for people. But there's also, you know, so much of daily life has been disrupted. If you just take the health service, for example, you know, I have health service staff talking to me, telling me that they haven't had referrals for whatever their specialty is for 8 or 9 months, and they're really worried about the long-term health implications of COVID for people who don't have COVID. You know, the mental health implications, people who don't have access to services, people who aren't going to their doctor when they find a lump or when they have a pain, you know, because they're concerned about these things. And that's just one area of daily life. You know, there's everything from planning weddings to planning families has all been disrupted, and people are suddenly very unsure about where they're going. And that uncertainty, it creeps in on people, and it begins to preoccupy them.
Yeah, and it's a weight that can bear down, and it can be paralyzing. You know, you can be stuck in that space where you're afraid to commit to doing something because of the uncertainty. And as you said, everything is almost put on hold. And if there is no expiry date or point where you can say it'll be normal from then on, it weighs heavily on people.
And people are doing their best. Yeah. You know, you can see people really, really trying. Schools and teachers have made huge effort to make going back to school as I don't want to say normal, but as interesting and as calming as possible. You know, companies are absolutely doing their best to try to accommodate their employees and not let people go. You see people shopping locally more in order to support local businesses, you know, because this is a really difficult time. And change normally comes reasonably slowly. It either comes very steadily or from a long way off. And neither of those, you know, paradigms have occurred in this case. Change has come very, very suddenly, unexpectedly, and in a lot of ways unequivocally. And there are a lot of people acting from fear right now. So we're seeing a lot of kind of pushback around wearing masks from a minority of people, and a lot of pushback against science and people questioning science or choosing not to believe it, which is, it seems counterintuitive because, you know, the science is incontrovertible in many ways, but they're coming from a place of fear, and that fear is, I don't want this to be happening. I don't want the world to be like this. I don't want my surroundings to be unsafe. So if I choose not to believe it, I enter into a kind of a faux bubble of safety because no, it doesn't exist, or I don't have to wear a mask. And then if I don't have to wear a mask and it doesn't exist, I don't have to stress about it. And it's a coping mechanism, and it's an ineffective coping mechanism, and it's dangerous. But that's the reason we see these things emerge, because people often are frightened by the possibility that this is here and it's real and it's dangerous.
Yeah, it's almost had one of those inappropriate laughing at a funeral moments when you were speaking, because all that popped into my head, I think, was an old Simpsons episode, and Homer, you know, says something like, I reject your reality and substitute it with my own.
You've nailed it. That's exactly it right there. It's absolutely all it is. No, I don't believe that. It's this, and and for a lot of people, that's around. I can't believe that, rather than I don't. They'll say I don't, but actually, really underneath, what they mean is I can't believe that.
Yeah, because the psychological price is too high. So that brings us nicely around to science, because it is the Midlands Science Festival. So we need to talk a little bit about the science. So maybe just could you explain to me what the difference between psychology and psychiatry is, and then the role that psychotherapy plays in the whole ecosystem?
Psychology is the science of the mind and behavior. And it's very different to the life sciences in the sense that there are no absolutes. There is no benchmark person. There is no, Kelvin temperature.
There is no normal.
There is no normal, and even average is questionable. So people say, people can often say, it's not a science because it's inexact, but it's exact actually, in the sense that we as human beings are inexact. We're all very, very slightly different, and you can't normalize a set of objects if they're all slightly different to each other. So it's a very unique kind of discipline. And it's dedicated to understanding how people do things, why they do them, what their motivation is, what it looks like. And a big part of it is applied to mental health, looking after people's mental health, and looking after people who may have mental health difficulties. And I'll come back to that in a second, because it ties into psychiatry and to psychotherapy. There's also another piece of psychology that looks into everyday things that we all do, and that allows us to apply psychology to very straightforward things. For example, when you're standing in a train station, the yellow line that's painted on the platform so that you don't step over it, that's psychology, that's behavioral science, because at some point somebody went and decided which color was most useful in people standing behind it. If we leave a line, how thick should the line be? How far from the platform should it be? That's behavioral science, that's psychology. And it's only one small example of kind of a huge field that looks at absolutely everything from infant development right the way through to the very last stages of dying and people's coping mechanisms and the process of that. It's a lifespan discipline of science. Psychologists, the majority of psychologists work in mental health, and they see people who have some form of mental health difficulty or some form of developmental abnormality or difference. And I say abnormal, but I don't mean abnormal in the sense that there's something wrong. I just mean that it's outside of the average. Okay,
it's different to a larger group, will we say?
Exactly that. So they work an awful lot in places like the health service, in hospitals, in clinics, that kind of thing. And they see people to support them, to help them to live their lives better, to help them maybe to change certain things that they do, and, or certain things that they want to change for themselves. Psychiatry is a medical discipline around mental health specifically. So a psychiatrist is a person who studies medicine as a medical doctor and then specializes in working with people who have mental health difficulties. Okay. They tend to view the mental health difficulties that people have from a more biological perspective than many psychologists do. Not a complete biological perspective, because they're very sensible and they recognize that often our surroundings and our social worlds really impact on how we are and who we are as well. But it is a psychiatrist who will prescribe medication for mental health difficulties, or who will be able to have someone admitted to hospital if they need it, and will lead a multidisciplinary team if necessary around looking after someone's mental health. Psychotherapy, which is a distinct thing from psychology and psychiatry, is the process of engaging people in psychological change arising from either wanting to be a little bit different in yourself, look at things differently, or change the way you look at the world, or for people who have mental health difficulties, to help them gain control of those difficulties, gain a greater depth of understanding about them, and gain an acceptance of who they are as a person. Psychotherapists are often a standalone discipline of people. They go through quite extensive training, but you can also have psychologists and psychiatrists who do further training on top of their original work to specialize as a psychotherapist.
And that's great, and it really, I suppose, for me, it clarifies what the ecosystem is. That they're complementary moving parts and approaches that, they have, we say, a specific focus, whether it's on the medical side or on the understanding how the brain is structured, or to the behavioural aspects, and that it is everything working together then. Yeah. And just then talking, I suppose, about psychotherapy, and you mentioned, that it's about the person recognising, and it strikes me then there's somebody who is engaging in that, then there's a certain level of maturity almost, and self-awareness and self-reflection, that needs to be there to actually do that.
And you often hear psychotherapy also referred to as counselling or talking therapy. And those terms are loosely interchangeable. They're not exact, but for the majority of people, counselling, psychotherapy, or talking therapy mean more or less the same thing. You can also have psychotherapy in the form of art psychotherapy or play psychotherapy. It as a discipline, it does its best to meet people where they're at and to meet their needs. It does, if it goes, or when it goes well, no, stop. The core purpose of psychotherapy is to facilitate a person going through change. People come to psychotherapy because they want to engage in some type of change, irrespective of whether they have mental health difficulties or not. That's why you go for therapy. Talk things out, and through the process of talking things out and actually taking them out of your head and putting language on them, you're developing that insight that you're talking about, that awareness of yourself. And often people will say things in therapy and then stop and go, oh my God, I never realized that was the way it was, until they say it out loud and they hear themselves saying it, or that they have it reflected back to them by the therapist.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to verbalize your inner monologue that
it's exactly
you
that.
Can't hear.
We don't think in English.
Yeah.
On a scientific level, from a neuroscience perspective, we think in really small little electrical charges through the brain. That's not English. It's only when we begin to formulate them into words and speak them out loud that it actually becomes language. And actually often it's only at that point that we realize really what's going on in our own head when we say it out loud.
So as an adult, I can listen to what you're talking about, and I can see the fascination and the attraction of psychology and understanding human behavior. But I'm wondering, as a child, is this something that always appealed to you? Is it something as a child you aspired? I'm wondering, what did you study? How did you get to be where you are?
I mean, I don't come from an academic family background at all. I remember when I was graduating from my PhD, one of the professors in UCD from the School of Psychology very kindly asked if I was the first doctor in the family. And I laughed kind of impulsively almost at the person, and said, no, I'm the first person in my family who went to college or did their leaving cert, never mind got to this level. So for me, it started, I think I was about 14. No, actually I was 14. And I was studying for my junior cert. I was supposed to be studying for my junior cert. And I bought a book over the Easter holidays called Psychology, the Science of Mental Life. And it was published by a guy called George A. Miller, who actually is quite well known in psychology. I didn't know that at the time. And it was actually published in 1957. And the cover has one of those M.C. Escher animations on the front of it, and just the language and the cover of the book really got my attention. And once I started reading, that was me. I was hooked. It all made sense to me, and from there it was, no, this is what I want to do. This is my identity. This is what I like. It's a privilege as a piece of work.
Yeah, and it's amazing, you know, that kind of clarity from such an early age of what was your passion, you know, and we do a lot of I suppose careers talks in schools and outreach in schools, and trying to help children and young adults find their passion. So I think it's a great message for people in secondary school. You know, find your passion, and if you're interested, you'll find a way. You know, people very much concern themselves about the job they're going to do or what they're going to be when they grow up. And our message always is find your passion and follow it, and the jobs will figure themselves out.
Very much so, and you know, it really wasn't an easy straight path. You know, you do your degree and then you do your master's, and you know, there were plenty of moments where I thought, this is a huge mistake. This is not what I was meant to do. I'm not good at this, or I'm not able for it, or I'm not the right kind of person or personality for it. There have been plenty of those moments where you're raw and really suddenly very unsure of yourself. And I think they're what make you human, and they also make you real. This was not that I decided at 14 I was going to be a psychologist and sailed all the way through it. It was very, very difficult on some days to get up and get out of bed and keep going at it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because it's kind of the nature of things, isn't it, almost to have to really experience adversity at some point in your life to really appreciate the privilege of what you do.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, our ultimate aim here today is to talk really about resilience and the science behind resilience, and I think we will circle back to it, but I think that's a really good starting point, that notion that it's okay to not be okay, and that in fact it's essential at times to stop and say, you know what, it's not all okay at the moment, I'm having a tough time, and to recognize that. So I suppose to move back and look at what a lot of our audience are experiencing at the moment, and lockdowns and the uncertainty that we've already talked about. I'm just wondering, in terms of mental health generally and the psychological impact and the long-term cost, it occurred to me, I suppose, listening to what you've written, or looking at what you've written and listening to what you've said about COVID-19 and the enforced abrupt isolation, that may actually be the longest and the deepest cut that COVID leaves on people. We might end up with a generation who have long-term psychological impacts. What do you think about that?
The only way we can equate this in contemporary or relatively modern history is to equate the impact of the COVID pandemic to people who experienced Blitz during World War II. It's incredibly different, but also incredibly similar. It was a sustained period of time where absolutely everything was utterly different. And what we do know for sure is that it is a period of time that no one who is old enough will ever forget. It is one of those periods in history that people will always remember aspects of. So there is no doubt that it will leave a mark in the sense that it will always be etched in people's memories and living history, but also in kind of contemporary history. It will always be recorded in history books that this global pandemic spread and that there was a huge toll, and you know that despite modern science's absolute best efforts, it took time to reach a conclusion with it, whatever that may be. That's still uncertain at this point. There is definitely a significant risk to people's mental health because there's uncertainty. We're heading into austerity or a period of economic recession. We know from the psychological literature, from the science that already exists, that recessions by themselves have a huge psychological impact on people. So if no other aspect of the COVID pandemic leaves a mark, we know that will affect people, and it will affect people from most socioeconomic classes, and it'll particularly affect people from socioeconomic areas that are maybe less resourced. We know that for sure. We also know that for people who have existing mental health problems, this has been a very, very, very stressful time. Their access to supports and routine services, things like day hospitals, rehabilitation programs, and the peer support that they normally, or some of them would normally rely on, is less available or not available at all. And we know that that's counterproductive to their mental health. We also know that people exist in isolation. Isolation is not good for the vast majority of people's mental health, and many people live alone. And because of that, many people who are in lockdown are isolated. So we absolutely, we know what all the factors are, and we can look at it and kind of say, they are the ingredients of a huge psychological impact. We don't know what the outcome of that is going to be. We don't know what the finished product will look like. And in all likelihood, as you said, we're a long way off really appreciating what the full psychological impact is. What we do know is that a lot of the factors or ingredients that would contribute to poor psychological well-being are already in the pot mixing.
Yeah, and I think touching on that aspect of it, access to supports and how it's been truncated and in some cases completely cut off very abruptly. And the whole notion then of people needing to look out for themselves and for each other, and the whole piece around self-care. What are your thoughts on self-care? Maybe to start with, to explain what the principles of self-care are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, I'm delighted you've asked that, because we're here to talk about resilience, but actually for me, we're really here to talk about self-care. And I know we're going to get to resilience in a second, but it's nice to actually lay out now the principles around, or the ethos around self-care. Self-care is a set of actions and behaviors and routines and rituals that allow an individual person to tend to their own mental health. It's not a way of preventing mental illness or preventing stress or preventing, psychological challenges in life, but it is a, I suppose, kind of an ethos, or a kind of a
worldview,
or a view of self, of looking after oneself and actually loving yourself. We live in a country where the term "you love yourself" is weaponized. There's no greater insult in Ireland than "your man loves himself." It guts you. There's no coming back from that.
It's unfortunate for psychologists.
It's very unfortunate for psychologists, because actually the answer should be, yeah, I do. Yeah. And if I don't love me, no one else can love me, and I can't love anyone else, because that's where it starts. You can't, that's where that principle begins within you. And self-care is about affording yourself time to do things that are good for you, but also hold a mindset that's kind to yourself. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to be upset and stressed and sad, and these things are okay, because often it's not the very nature of the event itself that causes problems. Certainly things happen in the world that are really stressful and very sad, but it's our reaction to it often. You often hear people say, "Oh, but other people have it worse." That's true, sure, absolutely, they do. But what you're experiencing is hard also. And pushing that away and almost chastising yourself for acknowledging that you're suffering in some way yourself compounds your suffering. Yeah. So self-care is about, as a set of principles or as an ethos, is around acknowledging that actually what I'm experiencing in myself is sore or difficult, and that I need to look after myself and care for myself in that way. Self-care is not selfish. Yeah. There's a huge perception that to take time out for yourself and care for yourself is treating yourself or pampering yourself or
rewarding yourself.
Rewarding yourself.
It has to be earned.
Yeah, and there's a huge paradox around that idea that you treat yourself or you reward yourself when you self-care, because what happens then is that when you have a good day, you treat yourself to something. And when you've a bad day, when you really need to self-care, you don't, because you feel you don't deserve it. And that can be, that's a huge problem. And it's kind of emerged from that, from the commercialization of self-care to, companies encourage you to treat yourself, or, a payday gift, or a treat, some sort of kindness to yourself. But that's not kindness. Kindness is going out on a really difficult, bad day and saying to yourself, it's okay, you made a mistake today, or this happened and it was bad, but you still deserve all of the love and compassion and kindness that you would have had access to on any good day.
Yeah, I think like you said, it's, I don't know if Irish people are hardwired in the other direction, but it certainly grates, I think, with our national stereotype, that notion of it, and it strikes me, it's a strange analogy maybe to make, but only the other day I was dealing with a group of PhD students in UCD who are going to be teaching for the first time ever. And every year when I talk to that group, it strikes me how self-critical they are, and how they're going to put themselves out there in front of a group of students and give of their time and their expertise and their knowledge, and they're petrified of making a mistake. They're petrified of doing something wrong, and trying to get them into that space where they can forgive themselves and allow themselves to make the mistakes and know that it's okay. It's a challenge.
It's exactly that. Yeah, that's self-care right there, and self-compassion, and say to them, you will make mistakes, because to make mistakes is inherently human. And that goes back to exactly what I said at the very start, that psychological science is different to other forms of science because there's no absolute. We are by nature imperfect creatures. Absolutely everybody makes mistakes on a regular basis, not from time to time, or not sometimes, all the time. We're all learning all the time. There's a lovely quote by Maya Angelou, which is, do what you think is best until you know better. When you know better, do better. And that's the nature of learning. And actually, we're going to get onto resilience in a minute, I know, but resilience and the development of resilience is by far and away best characterized or best described as learning. That's how it happens. And by encouraging your PhD students, as you are, to not be hard on themselves and not to criticize themselves, actually you will allow them to work much better, because they will realize that they are going to make mistakes and that that's normal, and they'll deal with them hopefully with a sense of humor and grace towards themselves. And that makes them a far better lecturer and a far better teacher.
Yeah, so I think we've teased the audience enough about resilience at this stage. So I think, and maybe to start off, it would be nice to maybe clearly outline what resilience is, and I think very importantly what it isn't, because we've talked about the evolving situation and the reactionary phase, and certainly resilience has almost become a buzzword that has popped into the public consciousness, and I kind of feel it's a word that's been used to almost beat people with in some situations, and it doesn't seem right.
It's exactly that. And actually, I know we've spoken about this a little bit before we came on, and I absolutely agree completely. Resilience has experienced a commercialization in the past 7, 8, 10 years, and we've seen a kind of an intensification of that over the last 10 months. I'll talk a little bit about, I'll tell you a little bit about what resilience is, but I think you're quite right. We'll spend more time probably talking about what resilience isn't. Resilience is your ability to continue to function relatively normally despite adversity. So it's the ability to continue to live, continue to do things, continue to hold yourself despite very difficult experiences in life happening. It's sometimes characterized or sometimes described as your bounce back ability. And it's not that. It's probably better described as your grow back ability. You're not expected to bounce back after something bad happening, because that's not how we as people exist. That's not how we function. We don't just hop up after a negative experience and keep going. You know yourself, or I certainly know, if something bad happens or if something happens that sets me back, it takes a couple of days to regain my confidence, to get back to normal. And it can take longer depending on what it is that happens. And the resilience that we're talking about, the scientific study of resilience and the psychological content around resilience, is very much around how you get back up and going, or how you keep going in very difficult circumstances. Resilience and self-care are really closely linked, because in the absence of that love for yourself or compassion towards yourself that we were talking about just a few minutes ago, resilience really struggles to emerge. And the best way to, I suppose, give an example of that is that anyone who's ever gone to a gym or engaged in any kind of regular exercise knows that your rest days are as important as your exercise days, because they allow your muscles to recuperate and to actually grow stronger, and that you're better for your rest days. And psychologically, we're exactly the same. We need those rest periods, which self-care allows us to engage in order to be psychologically stronger and psychologically more resilient.
Yeah, and it's that, again, an inappropriate laughing moment. It's, in my head, I'm equating it with that notion of, somebody out on the street, out in public, and they're walking along and they twist their ankle, they fall down in a heap and bang their hip or bang their head, and they're up in seconds, and they're walking on as if nothing happened, and they walk around the corner and collapse. Just that, giving that outward appearance that everything is all right, and carry on regardless. And I think, again, I don't know if there's probably no studies done, but it seems to be particularly prevalent with the Irish psyche.
We have a particular view of resilience in kind of wider Irish culture, and it's very much rooted in our geopolitical history, famine, occupation, difficult times, economic recession, and also the prevailing kind of religious orientation in Ireland has also had a huge impact on how we view ourselves, and sacrifice and being sinners, and all of that impacts as well. So it's so multifactorial, but you're quite right. We do have a particular view of, I suppose, what you might almost call softness in Ireland in a lot of ways. And at the same time, actually, we're internationally famous for our kindness and softness towards others, but maybe not inwards towards ourselves.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I suppose, what we perceive as national stereotypes. Spent a few years in Australia when I was younger, and it always struck myself and my wife for a culture that's, in certain ways, machismo and quite bolshy and quite masculine, and really keeping up the outward appearance of strength. That in day-to-day life, they actually embrace that whole notion much better than we do. And you would get asked out there day to day, how are you doing? And it wasn't an Irish, how are things? I'm grand. It was actually, how are you doing? How are things? Is there anything you need to talk about? So I think there is that historical legacy. It does affect us, and you can see the differences.
And I often find when I ask people how they're doing outside of a therapy room or outside of a kind of a professional setting, I have to ask it twice. I'll say, how are you doing? Like, oh yeah, I'm grand, yeah, not a bother. And you go, oh, that's good, yeah. How are you doing? Yeah. How are you actually doing?
You have to ask it more than once.
You do, and you kind of have to emphasize it a little bit more. How are you doing? And then actually you find people actually open up and they're willing to talk about just how they actually are quite quickly. It's good to talk about how you actually are. It's good to be able to say to people, I'm not great, or I'm okay today, yesterday was a hard day, or, this is happening, or this has occurred. And, to verbalize things and acknowledge them, it's really, really important. So it's one of those things that we're getting better at. Yeah. Definitely, as an Irish society, we are getting better at it. Children have a far deeper emotional language than my generation or your generation, or certainly generations before us ever did. And they've far greater insight to the sensitivities and the well-being of themselves and others. It's amazing to see it.
Yeah, and I think, so having talked about what resilience is, and the type of things that contribute to, say, your resilience capacity, I think it's important to, as you said, talk about what it isn't, because it does feel like it's been, in a way, weaponized
Absolutely.
recently.
There's this perception that we can all be resilient and that will make everything okay. If we're just a little bit more resilient, we'll be able to cope. You see it particularly in large organizations, multinational organizations, in corporate entities where staff are actually sent on resilience training. And the purpose of that isn't to look after staff, it's so that companies or organizations can give them more work in the same time period and tell them that they just have to be more resilient. And that kind of concept of resilience is actually a blame culture, because if something happens to you then, or if it's too much for you, it's your fault for not being resilient. That's not what resilience is at all. There's a lot of research, a lot of early research on resilience emerged from military contexts, particularly in the United States, where soldiers who were coming and going from theatre of war were assessed for their resilience. And it was found, reportedly in the peer-reviewed literature, the conclusions drawn were that, as soldiers acclimatized to war zones and combat, that they became more resilient, and therefore that it was okay to keep sending them back into, active war zones. And you have to look at that maybe outside of the political motivation that may have driven that kind of research, and realize that there's a very strong likelihood that actually the reason that soldiers become more what they would have called resilient was actually because they were traumatized and they'd been desensitized to it. That's not resilience. In the same way that a company having a culture of resilience and piling work on people, or piling responsibility on, or demands, or time frames, or any of the multitude of things that one expects working in certain sectors, that if they're not able for that, then it's because they're not resilient enough. So what resilience isn't is some sort of, I suppose, a magic solution for the excessive workloads of kind of contemporary modern day industrial living, if that makes sense. Resilience takes time. You don't experience something today and become resilient tomorrow. It takes an awful lot of time. You experience something in small increments over a prolonged period of time. And it's literally what we call building experience. You don't start as learning to drive a car today and automatically become a chauffeur tomorrow. It takes time to build the experience required, and that experience comes in very small little pieces. And you build experience in, holding the balance of the wheel of the car, knowing when to brake, knowing when to accelerate, knowing the dimensions of cars. There's a reason we don't start off learning driving very large cars, by and large. We learn in very, very small cars, because there's literally less of the car. It's
less, opportunity to make a mistake.
Absolutely, yeah. You literally have less, a space around you in which you can, it's easier to navigate it. It's easier to gain experience of where the corners of the car are, for example. And, the turning circle of a small car is much smaller than a bigger car. So resilience is very similar to that. You experience things, and it's how we build experience in our professional lives. It's how we build experience as in our relationships, in our emotional lives. You experience difficult events, and over time you get healthier in how you deal with them. It's not about being stronger. That's not what this is. This is about being increasingly healthy in how you manage and cope with difficult situations.
Yeah, and I think that's, I suppose, the real challenge, or the real complexity with resilience is, your analogy with learning to drive a car is great, but the fundamental difference you see is that, with driving a car, if you want to get better, you can go out and you can practice. Whereas resilience is, it's a capacity we develop over time by experiencing things that, if you're, unless you have a particular, we would say, attraction to averseness, they're situations you would normally avoid and try to avoid and try and engineer out of your life. Yeah. that makes it, challenging to develop.
It does, and resilience really occurs in the experience of major life events. There's no absolute resilience. People are resilient in different pockets of their world. For example, as a professor in UCD, you're more resilient to dealing with difficult questions. The more experienced you become in your lecturing, or more comfortable you become in your own space as as an expert in your field. And that takes time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that resilience that you have, or the ability to kind of get up and keep going maybe when a research experiment doesn't work out, or a study doesn't have the outcomes that you expected, that kind of resilience doesn't necessarily translate to other corners of your life. Do you know what I mean? You could be a very resilient person in one area and then be utterly devastated by an experience in some other part of your life. So we develop resilience in pockets.
Yeah. All down to your life experience.
All down to what's already happened to you. And often people say, oh, I'm not a very resilient person. Well, often that's the case if you say that, mainly because you haven't had to be resilient. Nothing has occurred that has tested your resilience. And people often don't realize how resilient they are until that's tested. So that's why I say it's your grow back ability, because as you said, if you fall over on the ground and hit your head and hit your hip, and you might bounce up initially, like that, and it's that kind of initial shock. But when you get around the corner and the adrenaline kicks in, you're going to become unsteady. You're going to start feeling pain, and it's going to be a little bit different. And that's why the term bounce back ability doesn't reflect what resilience is. It is that thing of saying, okay, I've hurt myself now, I'm bruised, or my leg is swollen, or I've torn a muscle, and it'll grow back over time. And in the same way, difficult life events knock you, but you grow back.
Yeah, and I think it's we all know people as well who display that kind of an attempt to bounce back psychologically. They suffer an obvious trauma, or an obviously traumatic event or series of events, and they don't stop. They don't acknowledge. They kind of fake it till they make it almost. But there is always down the line, there's a recovery, or something happens.
They don't make it. They keep faking it until it catches up with them. It's a really common occurrence, particularly in, as we've already said, societies like Ireland, where the ability to be soft is less culturally appropriate. It's seen as important to be able to take the hard knocks. And you particularly see it with people who have chronic or life-limiting illnesses, where other people say to them, "Aren't you great? You're really, look at how you're dealing with this. You're really great." Then they come and they see someone like me and they say, well, people are saying this to me, but what else am I supposed to do? I don't have an option but to keep going. Yeah. And that's not resilience. It's okay to say, no, actually today's a really bad day, and I'm sore and I'm uncomfortable, or I'm sad, or whatever it is. Having the permission to do that, and to not have to bounce back up off the ground and keep going and keep a brave face for other people, is really, really important.
So Andrew, I suppose, having talked about what resilience is and what the characteristics of it are, and then I suppose they dismissed some of the notions about what it isn't. We'll probably have some parents watching, and there is some good evidence out there about things you can do to maybe foster resilience, particularly in young people.
There's a huge balance of being a parent, of being overly kind and cocooning and wrapping children in cotton wool, and I think it's called helicopter parenting, with the cold, harsh kind of parenting style of, get up, there's nothing wrong with you. There's a middle ground. Children have to feel loved and held and supported, and that what they're experiencing is real and is valid, and that yes, it does hurt, or no, that's not nice that it happened. But there is then also that existential, I suppose, reality that bad things happen in the world, and they happen often for no reason to people who don't deserve it, if that makes sense. I saw a lovely quote recently that people saying nature's cruel, but it's kind in the sense that it's equally cruel to everybody. This is the world, and fostering in children a sense that bad things do happen, and that it's okay to feel them and to experience that, and to feel sad or in pain, or and to acknowledge that and to speak about it is really, really important. But also that it does happen, and it's inevitable. There's a quote by Haruki Murakami, which is, I think it roughly translates to pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And it's very easy to sit here and say that, but to kind of foster a realization in people, or to nurture a realization in adults and children, that the world has the potential to be I suppose a cruel place and a dangerous place, and that none of us are entitled to an easy life, despite what I suppose contemporary Western culture tells us otherwise. It is really important in helping to build that sense of resilience, because it helps then that grow back ability. It prevents you from being I suppose almost mortally wounded by certain psychological events. It allows you to recover and to rehabilitate.
Yeah, and I think that phrase that or that sense of entitlement, it's really important in the whole thing, because I think moving past that is really important in terms of resilience. That to get away from that almost indignation when something goes wrong, that why did that happen to me, and to move to the space where you're, I suppose, able to acknowledge, well, it happens to everybody, and that's just life.
People say, why me? Well, why not you?
Yeah.
That's a really important, I find personally, and the research would also support it, that's a really important point to understand, that I suppose, as you said, that entitlement, but that, as you said, why would that happen to me? Why would it not happen to you? For the same reason that it happens to other people. These are often random events or inevitable events in life. A loved one passes away, or someone gets sick. That happens to everyone in some way, shape, or form. And that's not to say it's any easier, because you look, as I said earlier, you don't look and go, oh, well, everyone's having a hard time, therefore my hard time isn't valid. But like I said, there's a balance of, this happens to everybody and it's happening to me right now, and that's really rubbish. Do you know? Yeah. And that's where the resilience kind of comes into it. This is really rubbish, and it's awful, and it's painful, or it's whatever negative emotion it's bringing up. But at the same time, this is part of life.
Yeah. And I suppose before we move on to talking about the next topic, something that literally just occurred to me is, I'm wondering how important is it the opposite, because we've talked a lot about, and you've mentioned several times, the importance of giving yourself that space to acknowledge when things aren't okay, and it's okay to be not okay. How important is it to acknowledge when things are good?
Yeah, gratitude is sexy right now, and there's it's as dangerous as the kind of principle that if you don't thrive, or you don't do well in life, that that you're not resilient enough. Gratitude is currently presented as this kind of ideal coverall. Life won't be so bad if you're grateful for what you have. You're lucky for what you have, and that's fine. You are, and it is lovely to stop and be grateful. And one of the things I often talk to people about doing is a kind of a 5-finger gratitude exercise, and it's a lovely one, because you ask people what they're grateful for, and they'll quickly name off, like, oh, friends, family, my job. When they get to the end fingers, they kind of run out of things, and it forces us to think sometimes and focus on what we do have, what is positive. And that is a lovely, positive psychological experience, but it's not going to stave off stress or worry or anxiety or pain. It's just a kind of I suppose, it's another piece in a larger jigsaw.
Yeah, and I think where you're talking about, your build back ability, it is important to, I suppose, know what you're building back towards, or
absolutely
to have that reference.
And when things do fall apart, to look at the building blocks you have and use them. Things can be really not great for somebody, and they can still stop and say, I have this, and this is going on, and I'm fortunate that I have X, Y, or Z. I don't like the term lucky. You're not lucky. Yeah. You work hard. We work hard for things. But I'm fortunate that I do, and I have this. And those blocks, they're where you start. You start putting them back together and putting one on top of the other, and that's resilience.
So you mentioned earlier, Andrew, that you're doing a lot of work with frontline staff, and obviously at the start of the pandemic and the when lockdown really kicked in, there was a big focus and in the public mindset, an acute awareness of, hospital staff, HSE staff on the front line, but also, Gardaí and the fire service, and I suppose the challenges that we're going to face them. How has that, and again, in the context of talking about resilience and not wanting to use resilience as something to almost hold over people and say you need to be more resilient, what sort of experiences have you been?
That's actually a really interesting question. I remember having a little rant on social media, I think Twitter, a couple of months ago at the early stages of the lockdown and the emergence of the pandemic in Ireland, where people were referring to frontline service staff as heroes and really taking umbrage at this because, again, if you hold people up as heroes, you don't allow them the space to be human. And it's a terrible thing to do. And by holding them up and saying they're superheroes and they're superhuman and they're amazing, and that doesn't allow them to be quiet and broken and tired and afraid, the same as absolutely everybody else is. And allowing them the space to do that's really, really important. There's no doubt that the people who work in our health service and all of our frontline services, literally all of the services, not just the blue light services, but services we would have never considered frontline before this, are absolutely amazing people and do work very, very, very hard. But they're also, I think the key word in that is they're people, they're human. They need things like their annual leave, they need their days off, they need their rest breaks, they need their lunch times. And a lot of services, because of lockdown, they don't have the same social outlet or social support that they would have had previously. It's well documented that services that work in difficult circumstances, humor is a huge coping mechanism. And because of the lack of opportunity to engage in socialization around things, they don't have the opportunity to engage in that kind of humor. So they've actually been restricted from often some of their really important coping mechanisms. And that takes its toll because, part of resilience is allowing the space for the resilient growth or the growth associated with resilience to occur. And that comes through healthy coping. And if you take those things away and then add in all of the stress and pressure and fear and pain that we've seen in the last couple of months, you're really putting a huge amount of pressure on. And there's no easy answer or quick fix because the staff who often do work in these contexts are very specialist, and they're very good at what they do. And you can't just replace them overnight or if they want to have a holiday, there isn't someone just standing there ready to step into their shoes. And I also think that it's a challenge for them in the sense that while they're held up as heroes and, kind of coveted for their contribution or almost their sacrifice, in some cases, literally their sacrifice, that doesn't make their work any easier or it doesn't accommodate their ability to do their work any better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I suppose one of the things that I would consider really important is actually stopping and saying, you're doing a great job and this is your job, but you also need to stop and care for yourself because your job cannot consume yourself. And we're not talking about burnout. Burnout is something far simpler than this. It's a much deeper.
It's a slow burn effectively because it is.
It is.
It creeps up on people, I think, and it's really interesting what you're saying. That kind of by I suppose the law of unintended consequences. You think you're paying someone a compliment by calling them a hero, but in fact you are burdening them with I suppose a feeling of needing to keep up a facade, which is maybe in the short term you can do it, but it's not long term sustainable.
It's not sustainable, and it's not human.
Yeah. And so I suppose, and just to wrap up our chat, Andrew, and it's been a privilege and really enjoyable talking to you. Let's say our Minister for Health gave you a call in the morning and offered you a blank cheque to do something for mental health and well-being in Ireland. What would you do?
How big a blank cheque?
Infinite.
Wow. Okay. I suppose one of the core pieces around respecting people's mental health and looking after people's mental health is respecting their autonomy to make decisions for themselves. If it were me personally, what I would do is make access to support far more readily available, that people could ring and speak to somebody who was able to sit with them in their pain at that particular moment. I'm not saying therapists, but it can be social workers, it can be psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. A lot of nursing staff are very good at it as well, but a lot of people outside of the health services who have trained as peer support workers. There's a huge evidence base for just the really positive value of allowing people time to sit in their pain and sit with them. So it will probably be something along those lines. I would not introduce any sort of massive paradigm shift in how we deliver mental health services, although it probably does need it. If you're talking about an immediate kind of response, it would be that people can phone and have what they would call a rant or a moan or a whinge. And I don't like those terms, but that is what often you hear people say. That's what people say. Yeah. What I'd say that people can talk and express kind of their fears and their anguish, and just have someone go, yeah, I hear you. And that's powerful.
Yeah, and I think the corollary to that is that sort of support and that type of support, it needs to be immediate and it needs to be there in a timely fashion, because that need and that I suppose drive to vent or to get something off your chest, if it is transient, but it doesn't go away, and if you don't get opportunity to access in a timely fashion and divulge yourself of those feelings,
absolutely,
then it goes inside and it goes down and it grows.
I think you've really hit on something. You've really said it eloquently there. It is transient, but it doesn't go away. And there's a reason that services like the Samaritans are available 24/7. It's because often these things come to you at 3 o'clock in the morning, or at a specific moment where your day is just not going well and you just feel that kind of depth of emptiness, and you really just want to say to somebody, I'm having a bad day, and just, I'm worried about COVID, or I'm worried about kids going back to school, or my job, or and just talk it. And not for someone to say, oh, it's going to be okay, or offer you solutions, but someone just to sit with you and or not physically sit with you, but listen to you over the phone and almost agree with you, or be present with you.
So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation we've had today. I want to thank Andrew for being here with us and for being so giving with his time and his expertise. It's been hugely enjoyable for me. I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too. And I hope you will join us for our future interviews for the Midlands Science Festival 2020.